Hi, so I'm Kym Winter and I'm the counsellor who works with NC UK. And thank you for asking me to come and speak with you all today. And I'm going to be talking about living with the uncertainty of it all. So it occurred to me when I was asked to give this talk that the uncertainty of it all is certainly a lot to be talking about. So maybe we should just spend a bit of time talking about what uncertainty are we talking about here? And really, it can't have escaped your notice that we're talking about this in the middle of a global pandemic. And of course, that has hugely impacted on all of our anxiety levels with the degree of uncertainty that we're all having to manage in all sorts of ways and the impact on our ordinary day-to-day lives. And of course, that leads into the fact that when we're talking about uncertainty, we are always talking about managing anxiety. The two go hand in hand. So it is an overused phrase, but we are living through unprecedented times with the pandemic and how it is impacting on all our mental health and well-being as a result. But we live with uncertainty all of the time anyway. The very act of being alive is an uncertain and complicated and anxiety-provoking experience. And most of the time we are managing uncertainty and anxiety in the background. Our mind and our body is ticking away, managing all sorts of personal anxieties that we might not even be conscious of. Questions like, am I okay? Am I loved? Will I have enough food? Will I have a job next week? Am I all right? So we're very preoccupied at a very personal level in ways that we're not always attending to in our day-to-day around managing just the ordinary anxiety of existence. Now, you are a group that, added to that, are managing the not inconsiderable anxiety of living with a complicated and complex condition. And of course, that impacts with anxiety and uncertainty in all sorts of ways at the personal level, day to day. Will I be all right today? Will I have enough energy? Will my symptoms be manageable? The longer term, what will this mean for me? How long have I got? Is this the right treatment? How long will I be stable? And all the associated anxieties that living with a long-term condition brings on your family life and your work and your relationships. So I think we can see that when we're talking about the all is indeed a lot. So one of the things that we have to think about is how do we manage and look after ourselves in the face of not inconsiderable anxiety, which is both ordinary and part of life, but also extraordinary as a part of the pandemic, but also living with a complicated condition. So what is it about uncertainty that makes us so anxious? Well, this goes back to very sort of early evolutionary principles. That in a way, we're always on the lookout for the lion in the undergrowth. We're always on the lookout for something that's going to ambush us. Are we safe? Am I all right? We're sort of on the lookout, even without realizing, for where's the threat, and thinking of the question, am I safe and am I okay? So anxiety is to some extent a very useful thing for us. It is that part and parcel of being alive. And the experience of anxiety, both in our thoughts and in our bodies, is the two working together to try and keep us safe. Sometimes our minds and our bodies slightly overplay it, and that's when we have to watch out for things and look after ourselves, and I'll talk about that later. And uncertainty means that we don't have enough clear information to know how best to respond in any one situation. So anxiety builds. It's a bit like saying, we don't know where to look first. And you probably have that sense in your body sometimes of not being quite sure what to do with yourself, what to think about, or how to respond. So we tend to have, when we're thinking about managing anxiety, we tend as people to lean towards one particular coping mechanism or another. And I'm thinking that if you're watching this video, you're probably already looking at this and thinking, I tend to lean in towards the direction of denial, or I tend to lean towards the direction of preoccupation. And this is what we're like. Neither polarity of managing anxiety is wrong. In fact, both can be very useful at different times. The problem is if we get stuck too far down one end of the tightrope or the other. Part of what's very important and helpful in managing anxiety generally, or in living with a long-term condition, or managing something like the pandemic, is being able to move up and down the tightrope. And there's a sort of sweet spot in the middle that I'm going to talk about, but it's if we get stuck either in denial or in preoccupation, that it can cause difficulties for us emotionally or psychologically. So if you're someone who sort of tends to prefer to deal with anxiety-provoking situations or thoughts towards the end of denial, you'll probably be used to having thoughts like, it's no big deal, don't make a fuss about it, I'm fine, I'll just ignore it. And you might find that you tend towards behaviours like not wanting to talk about something that perhaps deep down you find anxiety provoking, or you might avoid situations or information or news or even appointments, say, that you fear might be anxiety provoking. You might get annoyed if people want to talk about something that you don't want to talk about, or you might be a bit dismissive. People are always making a fuss about that, I don't pay any attention. Or you might find that you eat or drink or sleep a lot to keep difficult thoughts or difficult feelings at bay. And it's not that denial is wrong. In fact, actually, denial can be very helpful. Sometimes it's important to be able to allow ourselves to keep difficult feelings at bay by walking down a bit towards the end of denial, to kind of keep things in perspective, to allow ourselves time off from more worrying thoughts or more worrying ideas. At the other end of the spectrum, you might be someone who tends to prefer dealing with anxiety by being a bit preoccupied by it. I did find myself wondering if, by virtue of coming to these webinars or these events, whether you as a group are perhaps more tending towards being preoccupied by anxiety, that you might tend towards managing anxiety by learning about things, by growing in knowledge, by seeking out information and facts. And of course, all these things are very useful and they can help manage anxiety. But sometimes they can tip off a bit over the other end, and you might find yourself having thoughts like, I can't stop thinking about it, or I'll only be safe if I keep focused on it, or thoughts like, I have to know something right now, as if it's unbearable to not know, or have to wait for information or news or appointments, for example. You might find yourself talking about the thing that makes you anxious a lot, whether that's the pandemic or your condition or even someone that you're worried about in your family. You might find yourself researching it all the time, that sort of late night Googling when you find yourself in the depths of the internet and it's usually not helping or feeling reassuring about living with your condition. You might find yourself veering towards a compulsive fact-finding, a need to know the truth about something. You might find it difficult to sleep or relax, or perhaps find it hard to be playful or sociable because you're so preoccupied. Part of your mental energy is always working away at the thing that you're worried about. So it's really important to remember, as I said earlier, that it is not that one state of mind or the other is wrong. In fact, both are very helpful. When you're living with an ongoing condition or you're facing anxiety in a particular situation or circumstance, it's very important to be able to move up or down this continuum a bit. It's a bit like saying to yourself, do I need to be able to give myself time off from my anxiety or my preoccupation? Or indeed, would it help me to think a bit more about my circumstances? If we get too firmly entrenched in denial, it can mean that feelings become a bit frightening, and we can end up distancing ourselves from people because we don't want things to get stirred up, or feelings can come out in our bodies sometimes. But equally, if we become too preoccupied, it can be exhausting. We can't think about something worrying all the time. It's just too much, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. So the sort of idea is that there's a sort of a sweet spot somewhere in the middle where you can sort of move around. So if you think of our little person here moving around up and down this little middle range where he's neither completely in denial nor completely preoccupied, but he can have a bit of both going on. And that's probably some sort of sense of emotional balance, or feeling okay enough, we might say. So we're going to move on to thinking about, well, really just sort of 9 tips, I suppose, really, to help manage with anxiety and uncertainty. And one of the most helpful ways to begin addressing anxiety in the face of uncertainty is to know what you're like, really. I imagine when I was talking about the continuum earlier, you've already got a sense of where you are. And if you haven't, ask someone that you live with and who's close to you, because they'll probably go, oh yeah, you're more like that, or you're more like that. So knowing what you're like means that you can look after yourself in the face of anxiety and uncertainty in the way that you need to sort of keep an eye on yourself. The important thing is that there's no right or wrong way to deal with anxiety or uncertainty, and the feelings that come up will be the feelings that come up. Feelings are in and of themselves neither good nor bad. It's what you do with them that is important. So I'd encourage you to try and not push away feelings, or indeed be critical of yourself. Say things like, oh, I should be dealing with this better or differently. That's not helpful. It's just about noticing what you're like. And that self-knowledge can then help inform how you care for yourself and help you make choices about your self-care and your decision-making going forward. And as part of that, it can be helpful to think about your past experiences of dealing with uncertainty or anxiety. How have you dealt with it before? What was helpful and what wasn't? If you look back and think about difficult situations, perhaps buying a house and you weren't sure if it was going to be available at the time you needed it to be, or indeed if it was going to happen. How did you cope with that? Did that feel okay, or do you want to revise how you did it? What were the problems involved in the way you dealt with it, or what worked well for you? We often learn to deal with anxiety and uncertainty a bit according to the people around us too, growing up. If you grew up in a family where you had a parent that was very anxious, you might have picked that up and assumed that life is a very anxiety-provoking process and become yourself very anxious. It'd be hard to trust the world to be benign or to look after you. So you might yourself feel quite anxious quite often. Or indeed you might have grown up around someone very anxious and thought, I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to do it that way. And so you've learned to sort of keep anxiety at bay by, well, what we might say a bit of denial, but keeping it at a distance so it doesn't impact on you. Being a bit suspicious of getting in touch with feelings. It's better not to. And it's not that any of these strategies are wrong, it's just that all might have their limitations at particular times in particular ways. So knowing what you're like and noticing the ways in which you manage anxiety and how it comes out or indeed doesn't come out is very useful for you going forward. So I'm sure you've seen lots of memes and postings on the internet and social media at the moment, which is all trying to come to terms with the pandemic. So there is a lot out there about saying we have to control what we can and accept what we can't. And the reason everyone's posting about this is because it's quite difficult to do. in practice. But it's a very useful exercise to, when you get in touch with some anxiety, or indeed you fear being anxious, say to yourself, what can I control? What is under my control? And bring your focus and your attention to that. And then at the same time, consider, what can I not control? What is not within my gift to deliver or to make possible? An example of this might be, say, you are uncertain about when your next hospital appointment is going to be. Now, what you can do is that you can ring up, you can try and find out when it is going to be. What you cannot control is when someone gets back to you, or indeed how they get back to you. Equally, you can control things like perhaps knowing that there's certain ways of looking after yourself that make your symptoms less likely to be a problem or difficult at particular times. But what you can't control, absolutely, is whether it's going to be all right or whether it's not. And one of the things I do a lot of work with you as NET patients is, in a way, learning to live with disappointment and manage disappointment. And we are creatures that need to make plans. We are creatures that need to be able to project into the future and have some idea of what that looks like. Very simply, to have things to look forward to. And I know one of the things that when you're living with NETs is that it can sometimes feel hard to do that for fear of disappointment. And of course, that's compounded too by the pandemic. Is it all right to plan things, or is there going to be a lockdown? Is it not going to be possible to go? Is it not going to be possible to see someone? But I would still encourage you to, where you can, to plan, to make things to look forward to. But in the spirit of accepting that you might have to adapt if it's not possible to do that particular thing. But that in so doing, you still allowed yourself the pleasure of the planning. And then it's about coping with the disappointment and rescheduling or rebooking, or saying, okay, it will be at some point I will do this. And the other important thing is to really keep to routines and structures where you can, particularly during the pandemic. And you've probably seen things about this already. Routines and structures give us time off from decision making. And decision making is very difficult for us. We're making decisions all the time during the day without even noticing. Should I get up? Should I sit down? Should I put a jumper on? Should I take a jumper off? Do I need to go out now? Do I need to stay in? Is this person looking at me in a funny way, or are they about to smile at me? So decision making is going on all the time. And routines and structures give us some predictability in the day, something to hang on to in the face of uncertainty and unpredictability. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is to notice and challenge unhelpful thoughts when you're having them. And often in uncertainty, this is where we start projecting our fears into the future. We start the what if scenarios. What if this happens? How will I cope? What if this happens? What will that mean? What if this happens? What if that happens? And the problem with what ifing is that we're trying to cover all the bases, but we never can. And the reality is we never quite know how we will feel or how we respond in any one situation until we actually get there. But it's part of trying to psychologically prepare ourselves. And that's not that it's wrong, but it has limitations, because we can end up so invested in future scenarios that we forget to just manage and stay with the present. So if you start what ifing, try and say to yourself something like, I'm going to practice not knowing for now. I'm going to bring myself back to the present, and I'm going to wait. The other technique I sometimes teach people is one allowing the worry train to pass. And this is the idea that all thoughts and feelings pass in their own time if we let them. And the knack is to not let them sort of pull into the station of our mind. So if you have a difficult thought or feeling, just notice it. Notice it coming in, drawing into the station. Oh yes, I know this worrying thought. okay, I could allow it to sort of, stay here, and I could invest in it, and I could really walk around this particular thought or feeling. But I'm just going to say, I know it. Thank you. Move on. I'm not getting on this particular train right now. Another technique you could try is one called worrying later, which is one I quite like actually, which is if you are finding your mind turning to something that's a real worry, maybe the results of an appointment or concern about a relative or a situation, and it keeps going over and over in your mind. You could try a technique which is saying, I'm actually going to worry about that later. And you set aside a time in your day where you say, I'm going to worry about this between, say, 6 and 6:30 this evening. And you write down the worry in a book and you say, right, that worry is there for me to come back to later. And at 6 or 6:30, you open up your book and you worry. You focus on that particular issue and you worry away at it and you think about it. And when the half an hour is over, you say, right, I am done with worrying for now. And you close the book and you say, I will come back to it tomorrow at the same time. And what you might find after a while is that there's a certain intensity or heat that goes out of the thing you're worrying about. Because you've sort of taken charge. You've said to your mind, I decide when we worry about things. You don't decide for me. The other thing is to remember that the future is never entirely certain, and that has always been the case. We're just more in touch with it now, partly because of living with a life-threatening condition and partly because we're living through a pandemic. So the feeling that we keep at bay of the future being uncertain is suddenly right up in front of our noses. So decide what matters to you. And this is something that a lot of people say is very helpful and unexpected side effect of difficult circumstances. It sort of brings into focus what is really important to you. You might have heard people talk about this as a result of COVID, making different decisions about how they want to live their lives, or noticing that things they might have taken for granted, they want to make more time for, realizing that certain aspects of life is easy to let go or doesn't get prioritized, and that actually making more time for people or pastimes or even values that matter to you is really part of taking up control and feeling in charge, even in the face of difficulty. And the other thing that can be very helpful during really difficult times actually is trying to bring our mind back to being thankful or grateful for what there is, not for what there isn't. There's a good phrase in psychology, which is that we often bias towards the negative. And this is part of looking for the line in the undergrowth. We're always worried about what isn't happening or what could go wrong. But we don't always bring our attention to what is going right or what we are grateful for, whether that's a good relationship with your consultant or a safe home or someone who loves you or a pet who you care a lot about. Trying to bring your mind to what you do feel grateful for and for what there is can be a very helpful way of counteracting some of the negativity. Looking after your general health, and I put this in because I know so much is coming out at the moment about how, because of COVID, it's so much easier to somehow kick into the long grass ordinary health issues, to fear that they won't be attended to or to worry that appointments are going to be possible. And of course, there is some truth to that. We know that accessing health services has got more difficult, but it's really, really important to allow yourself to make a fuss and to seek help if you need it. And a lot of these things you will know, but I always think they are worth stating again and again and again, because we are not always great at looking after ourselves, particularly in the face of stress or in the face of difficulty. But it is about eating thoughtfully and well. It's about keeping an eye on how much you're drinking or any drugs that you use. It's about exercising, even a little bit where you can, because it helps to keep all your works working and it helps to release hormones that help to keep your mood stable. Do something that you enjoy, however small it is, even if it is saying, I am going to have a particularly nice cup of tea or coffee that I'm going to make, or I'm going to have a really good bath this evening, or I'm going to sit in the window and enjoy this sunshine. Try and notice moments where you can take pleasure and enjoyment in your day, however small those moments are. As I was saying earlier, do keep up with general and specific health appointments. And I understand that can be quite difficult at this present time, but I can only encourage you to persist and have faith that you will get appointments in due course. But it's back to that, okay, right now I can only do what I can do, and I will have to wait, and I will have to balance persisting and nagging and pursuing appointments with accepting that I've done my bit. I will put it down for now, and I will wait for that appointment to come through, and then putting a note in your diary for when you ask for it again. And also ask for help, particularly with emotional issues or things that you're struggling with. Let people know. I think we often fear that we will be dismissed or we will be overreacted to, but often people are kinder and respond more helpfully than we fear they might. And if you don't get the help or response that feels helpful the first time, try again or try someone else, but don't give up. So be kind to yourself. I say this a lot in talks. It's so important to acknowledge just the amount of uncertainty and anxiety you manage in the background every day when you're living with NETs. And it's so easy to forget that that's the case. And I always say that, sometimes it's worth getting to the end of the day and saying, well done me, I got through another day, or, well, hey, look at me, look how well I'm doing. Because it is a real emotional piece of work to be managing the anxiety of living with NETs. And it's a double amount of emotional work to be dealing with the pandemic on top of that. So the fact that we're all functioning, we're all here, that you've turned up to this today is an achievement in itself. Manage your energy banks. And this again is very key. We often want to have more energy than we have. And this goes back to my earlier point. Be mindful of how much energy it takes emotionally just to keep it all hanging together, keep yourself steady in the face of anxiety and uncertainty that you're dealing with. So just manage your energy banks. Be patient with yourself. Think, if I do this today, maybe I need to have a quieter day tomorrow. Or if I rest a bit today, hopefully, and this is back to what I can control, I might have a bit more energy in my energy bank for tomorrow. It is not certain, but I'm doing my bit. Stay connected. Sometimes when we're feeling anxious or we're feeling low, we can withdraw from people, and that's not always helpful for us. And of course, particularly in the current climate, there might be even more tendency to want to sort of keep safe, to withdraw, not see people too much. And that's very understandable, but stay connected in creative ways. Use Zoom, use FaceTime, keep connected up with all the social media that you can. Back to what I was saying earlier about noticing what you're like. Notice difficult thoughts or feelings as they happen. Don't judge them. Don't try and push them away. Don't be cross with yourself. Just notice them. Go, oh, that's interesting. I'm having that thought again. Okay, that's all right. Right now, I'm safe. It's okay. I'm just logging it. And again, ask for help if you need to. The other thing I talk a lot about with all of you as a group is about mindfulness. And I would really encourage you to dip a toe into looking at mindfulness if you haven't done so already. And I've put some websites and apps that you can look at and download at the end of this presentation. But mindfulness is a really helpful technique, which is all about really staying in the present. A lot of what causes us emotional distress in life is projecting into the future things that we fear might happen, or dwelling too much on things that have already happened and feeling ashamed or embarrassed or anxious that they'll happen again. But usually in the present, like right now, you're probably sitting somewhere at home, hopefully with a cup of tea, hopefully feeling comfortable just watching me talk right now, right this particular moment. Just put your feet on the floor and take a deep breath, and you're okay. That's mindfulness. And practicing moments of mindfulness in your day where you bring yourself back to the present and say, right now, right this moment, I'm just going to deal with what is now. It gives your mind time off from all its chattering and all its worrying about what could happen or what might happen. And similarly, I'd encourage you to look at some of the really good relaxation techniques and apps and programs that are out there now, particularly at night time. I know nighttime can be a very difficult time when you can feel very lonely and you can feel very subject to all those worrying thoughts and ideas. So having relaxation techniques or using some of the mindfulness apps can be really helpful at night time. They also get your body in the habit of learning to relax again. If you're quite an anxious person, you can get so used to living in an anxious state, you don't always know it's sort of happening. But training your body to learn how to relax again can really pay off in the long run. So really mindfulness is about just bringing your focus always back to the present, because mostly in the present we are safe enough. There isn't a lion about to ambush us right this particular moment, even though we sometimes fear and are on the lookout for one. So I'm just going to finish with what I thought was quite a nice quote from someone called Tony Bernhard, who's the author of a book which some of you might like or some of you might have, called How to Live Well with Chronic Pain and Illness. And she says that uncertainty is an inevitable part of the human experience. The quality of our lives improves dramatically if we can learn to make peace with it. When I wake up each morning, I try to reflect that I cannot know for sure what each day has in store, especially with regard to my health. Then I decide to greet the day nonetheless with as much caring attention, self-compassion, and open-heartedness as I can muster. And I hope you'll do the same. So I hope this has been helpful. The next slide has a few useful resources about organisations and websites to look at about mindfulness and also about managing anxiety. So as I said, I hope this has been helpful, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen.